Aita for selling my $700 million company the same week my husband's mistress died, and he expected me to comfort him about it? The weight of what he never gave her. Part 1. The Unraveling. The house smelled like grief that wasn't hers to carry. Miriam Ashford stood in the doorway of the kitchen, still in her coat, her laptop bag hanging from one shoulder, watching her husband sit at the island with a glass of scotch he hadn't touched. Daniel's posture was wrong in a way she had no language for yet. Shoulders caved inward, chin dropped low, his whole body folded around something invisible, something he was protecting or mourning or both. The evening light caught the silver at his temples. He'd been 43 in March. She'd bought him a watch. He'd said, "Thank you," Miri with the same voice he used when confirming dinner reservations. "The Callaway accident," he said, without looking up. "Did you see it on the news?" She set her bag down. She'd been in a 13-hour negotiation with Strident Capital's acquisition team, and her feet ached in a specific and righteous way. The boat accident? Yes. Off the coast near Hilton Head. Terrible. Both of them, Daniel said. Both of them gone. She looked at him more carefully now. There was something in his inflection, a crack so fine she almost missed it, the way you almost miss a fracture in expensive ceramic until the light shifts. "Did you know them?" she asked. "I knew Marcus." A pause. Long enough to drive a car through. "And Claire." "I'm sorry, Daniel." She moved to pour herself a glass of water. "Were you close?" The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. It had started, she would understand later, mapping it backward the way you map the origin of a fire, approximately 4 months before the accident. In November, she'd noticed the change the way you notice weather, gradually, then all at once. He'd become secretive with his phone in a way that was almost theatrical, the screen angled away at dinner, the device face down on every surface like it was ashamed of itself. She had registered this and filed it under stress because Daniel worked in commercial real estate, and the fourth quarter was always brutal, and she had her own company to run, Ashford Next, a B2B software infrastructure firm she'd built from a consulting firm she'd started in her second bedroom 11 years ago, now valued at north of $600 million and climbing. She hadn't had the bandwidth for suspicion. She'd been building something. There were calls he took in the garage. She'd heard him once, laughing, a laugh she didn't recognize, lighter and younger than the laugh she'd married, like a version of Daniel that existed before disappointment or obligation or whatever category she'd been placed in. There were 2 trips to Charlotte that he said were client meetings. She had not questioned them because she'd been in Seattle closing a partnership deal and the world had felt too large to police. There was the Saturday in December when he'd come home 3 hours later than he'd said and explained the delay with a vagueness so smooth it had clearly been rehearsed. Traffic was a nightmare. Then Tommy called. "You know how he gets?" And she'd looked at him and thought, "He's lying to me." And then her phone had buzzed with an engineering crisis, and the thought had simply slid away like water off polished stone. She had been, she would later acknowledge, a woman so accustomed to an empty marriage that she'd stopped expecting it to be full. The grief worsened over the following week in a way that grew impossible to ignore. Daniel stopped eating with any real intention. He slept in, which he never did. She found him twice in the study past midnight, not reading, not working, simply sitting in the dark with his hands folded in his lap like a man in a waiting room. The scotch bottle on the bar was depleting at a troubling pace. On Thursday evening, 8 days after the accident, she set a plate of pasta in front of him and sat across the kitchen island and said, plainly, "Daniel, talk to me." He looked up. His eyes were red at the edges. He'd been crying. Not in front of her, never in front of her. Daniel Ashford was a man who treated emotion like a financial liability, but the evidence was there on his face. "I don't know how to explain it," he said. "Try." He pressed his fingers to his mouth. "I feel like something has been taken. Something important. And I can't tell you why because you wouldn't understand." She sat very still. "Try me. I just need you to be here for me right now, Miri. Can you do that? Can you just be here and not ask 100 questions and just support me?" She looked at her husband across the granite countertop in the kitchen of the home she had bought, had paid for in full with the proceeds of her Series B round, while he'd contributed, "I'll handle the landscaping budget." And she felt something shift inside her. Something tectonic. Slow and permanent. "I'm here," she said quietly. But she was also, for the first time in 4 months, paying very close attention. Part 2, Claire. She didn't go looking for it. That was the thing she would want anyone to understand. She wasn't a suspicious woman by nature. She was a systems thinker. She looked for patterns the way an engineer looks for patterns. Not with jealousy or paranoia, but with the clean, cold eye of someone who builds things that cannot afford to fail. The pattern had been there for 4 months. She simply had the confirmation now. She started with his email, not his personal account, but the secondary account she discovered only because his laptop had auto-populated it in a shared household browser and she'd needed to log into their joint insurance portal. The password was, embarrassingly, the name of his childhood dog followed by a year she recognized as the season his college football team had won a conference championship. She'd known Daniel Ashford for 14 years. She knew his passwords the way she knew his breakfast order. She did not want to be right. She went in wanting to be wrong. Claire Hadley Voss, 41. Married to Marcus Voss, a venture capital partner who'd apparently been more interested in his sailboat than his wife. Miriam found 18 months of emails that read, in their totality, like a small catastrophic novel. "I keep thinking about last Tuesday. I don't want to stop thinking about it." Claire, November. "You're the only thing that makes sense to me right now. Everything else is just noise." Daniel, December. "What are we doing?" Claire, January. "I don't know. I only know I can't stop." Daniel, January. My wife is in Seattle again. Daniel, with a hotel address attached. February. She read for 2 hours. Her coffee went cold. Outside, the March rain fell without apology. She was not surprised. That was the thing that surprised her. She was not surprised in the way that you are not surprised when a ship you watched listing for months finally, slowly, goes under. There was grief in it. Yes, a compressed, airless grief, but no shock. The shock had been spent already, distributed in small doses across 100 small moments she'd noted and then set aside. The unanswered questions. The phantom laugh in the garage. The way he'd stopped touching her sometime around November with the finality of a man who had found somewhere else to put his hands. What she did not expect was what she found next. She'd always been the money in this marriage. She had known this. It had not shamed her. She ran a company. Daniel managed commercial lease deals that closed slowly and paid inconsistently, and she had not held this against him because she had chosen to believe, that a marriage was not a ledger. But a marriage, she was discovering, could become one. She pulled their joint account statements. She'd always granted him access, full and automatic, because she was busy and because she trusted him and because she'd been the kind of fool that a woman builds herself into over 14 years of being too competent to notice she's being robbed. 14 months of transfers. Not large enough individually to trigger her attention. Between $3,000 and $8,000, 7 or 8 times. A Ritz-Carlton in Charleston. A boutique hotel in Savannah. 2 charges at a jewelry store in Atlanta she'd never heard of and certainly never received anything from. A weekend rental of a private sailboat. She paused at this, the irony sitting in her chest like a stone, out of Beaufort. He had spent, across 14 months, $61,000 of her money on another woman. Her money. The money from Ashford Necks. The money she had woken at 5 in the morning for. The money she'd built out of nothing but a good idea and a ferocious refusal to fail. The money that paid for this house and his car and the lifestyle he inhabited with the comfortable ease of a man who had never questioned where comfort came from. He had taken it, and he had spent it on Claire Hadley Voss, and now Claire Hadley Voss was dead, and he was sitting in Miriam's study at midnight grieving her, and tomorrow he would need Miriam to be here and supportive and not ask 100 questions. She closed the laptop. She sat in the kitchen for a long time, in the dark, very quietly, and she thought about the company she had built. The offer Strident Capital had put on the table 3 weeks ago. $700 million, cash acquisition, clean close. She'd been considering it, weighing it, wondering if she was ready to let go. She decided she was ready. She picked up her phone and texted her attorney. Call me tomorrow at 8. I'm taking the offer. Then she went to bed, and for the first time in recent memory, she slept deeply and without interruption. Part 3, the conversation. She gave him 2 more days. This was not cruelty. This was precision. She let him have his scotch and his midnight silences and his grief for the woman he had spent $61,000 of her money loving. She moved through the house quietly, conducting herself with the professional composure she developed across 2 decades of conference rooms where men had underestimated her, and she signed the term sheet with Strident Capital, and she called her CFO, and she called her board, and she began the orderly, disciplined process of closing the most significant transaction of her professional life. On Saturday morning, she made breakfast. Eggs, toast, coffee, his preferences, from memory, the way she'd always known them. He came downstairs in a gray Henley, hollow-eyed, and sat at the island. You seem better, he said, which was his way of noting that she seemed different. I am, she said. She set his plate down and sat across from him with her own coffee and looked at him steadily. I need to talk to you about something. He looked up. Something in her register seemed to reach him. I know about Claire, she said. The color left his face in a single, clean motion, like a window blind being drawn. Miri, I'm not asking for a confession. I read the emails. I have everything I need to understand what happened. She kept her voice level. She'd given her first investor pitch in a borrowed blazer in a conference room in 2013 with $30,000 left in her bank account, and she'd been steady then too. Steadiness was a thing she'd built. I also reviewed our joint account statements. You spent $61,000. My money, Daniel. That's not, he stopped. Started again. I was going to pay that back. From what? She asked this genuinely, without venom. From your commission on the Breckner lease? The one that's been in review since October? He said nothing. You grieved her in front of me, Miriam said, and this was the only moment where her voice thinned slightly, the only place the architecture showed stress. You sat in this kitchen and asked me to hold your grief for a woman you were sleeping with and spending my money on, and you expected me to do it because that is what I have always done. I have carried things for you. I have funded things for you. I have been here, quietly, building something real, while you were, she paused, while you were somewhere else. Daniel set down his fork. His jaw was tight. She recognized the expression. It was the one he wore when he was calculating how to manage a situation rather than how to meet it. I loved her, he said. And then, as though hearing himself, he looked away. I know, Miriam said. That's actually the thing I needed to understand. Because I spent a long time wondering if you were ever capable of that. Now I know you were. You just didn't choose me. The kitchen was very quiet. I'm filing for divorce, she continued. My attorney is already working on it. Given the financial misconduct, I'm not anticipating a complicated process, but I want you to have the name of a good lawyer. She slid a business card across the island toward him. She'd already had it ready. I'm not interested in destroying you, Daniel. I'm just done. Miri. His voice cracked. She didn't know if it was for her, or for Claire, or for himself. She suspected it was for himself. We can work through this. Therapy, we could. I've accepted an acquisition offer for Ashford Next, she said. $700 million. The close is expected in 45 days. She stood, picked up her coffee. I wanted you to know, because it will be relevant to the divorce proceedings, and my attorney will be transparent about the timeline. I'm not hiding anything. She allowed herself, just briefly, a small and private smile. I never was. She left him sitting at the island. She took her coffee to her office, closed the door, and got back to work. Part 4. Hiroshi. The acquisition gala was Strident Capital's idea. A celebratory dinner at their New York offices, 40 floors up, the city spread out below like a circuit board lit at dusk. Miriam had attended these events before, on the other side of the table. She knew how they worked. Champagne, congratulations, strategic conversation, and a room full of people deciding whether to admire you or calculate how to use you. She was accustomed to both. She wore a dress the color of deep water. Her attorney had flown in from Atlanta. Her CFO, her CTO, her VP of engineering. The people who had built this thing with her, who'd earned their pieces of $700 million in the way that only people who actually built things ever earned anything. She was standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows with a glass of sparkling water when she heard a voice to her left say, in very precise and careful English, "Forgive me. I was told you're Miriam Ashford. I wanted to introduce myself before the evening got away from us." She turned. He was perhaps 45, lean in the particular way of someone who moved through the world with intention, with dark eyes that were assessing her in a way that was direct without being aggressive. The way someone looks when they're genuinely interested rather than merely performing interest. He had the kind of posture that comes not from rigidity, but from ease. He wore his suit the way someone wears something they've simply stopped thinking about. "Kenji Mori," he said, extending his hand. "I'm relocating Mori Systems' North American headquarters to New York. Strident Capital is managing part of our real estate strategy, which is how I came to be here tonight. Though I'll admit the reason I haven't moved from this corner of the room is substantially less professional than that." She shook his hand. "Miriam Ashford. And what's the less professional reason?" "I wanted to speak with you," he said, without hesitation. "I've followed Ashford Next for about 3 years. Your infrastructure architecture for mid-market SaaS integration is, genuinely, I mean this, some of the most elegant systems design I've seen built at that speed. I said to my CTO last year, whoever built this thinks in first principles. It's rare." She looked at him steadily. "Most people at these events lead with the valuation. The valuation tells me what the market thinks," he said. "The architecture tells me what you think. I find you considerably more interesting than your market cap." She found herself, to her own mild surprise, smiling. Not the professional smile, the other one. The one she kept for things that were actually funny or genuinely unexpected. "Mori Systems," she said. "IoT infrastructure and industrial automation. You know us. I've been watching your North American expansion strategy for about 18 months. Your sensor network architecture in the logistics vertical is interesting. You solved the latency problem differently than I would have." He looked at her with an expression that shifted slightly, something quickening in it, a kind of recognition. "How would you have solved it?" "Edge layer processing with predictive caching. More upfront complexity, but the network overhead drops significantly at scale." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We actually built a prototype of exactly that approach in 2022. Shelved it because our infrastructure team thought it was too aggressive. I have thought about that decision almost every quarter since. The conservative choice is almost always more expensive in the long run," she said. "Yes," he said. He was looking at her with his full attention now, and there was something in it she recognized. Not the look of a man who was waiting for his turn to speak, but the look of a man who was actually listening. "Yes, I found that to be true in many contexts." They talked for an hour. She didn't notice the first 40 minutes passing. She noticed the last 20 because she started to pay attention to the conversation the way you pay attention to something you want to remember. He was in New York for 2 more weeks before a return to Tokyo. He was overseeing the relocation personally. His ex-wife had remained in Japan. They had separated 2 years ago. Amicably, he said, in the way that people say amicably when they mean with great sadness but fundamental honesty. He had a daughter who was 17 and would finish school in Tokyo before potentially joining him in New York. He spoke about her with a warmth that reorganized his whole face. "You built your company alone?" he asked, later in the evening. "I had a team," she said. "I didn't build it alone. But the original vision, yes, that was mine to carry." "That's a particular kind of loneliness," he said. "Being the person who can see the thing most clearly. The burden of the original image." She looked at him. "That's exactly what it is. I've never heard someone put it that way. I've been carrying my own version of it for 20 years, he said. "You learn to make friends with the loneliness. Or at least to stop treating it as a deficiency." The party had shifted around them, thinning as the evening ran late. Somewhere across the room her CFO caught her eye and raised his glass, and she raised hers back. "I'd like to continue this conversation," Kenji said, "in a context that doesn't involve 40 people and a champagne tower. If you're willing." "I'm going to be in New York through the end of the week," she said. "Then I hope you'll have dinner with me." She considered him. The city shimmered behind him through 40 floors of glass. She was 51 days out of a 14-year marriage to a man who had found her so easy to dismiss that he'd grieved another woman in her kitchen and asked her to hold the pain. She was the sole architect of a $700 million exit. She was, for the first time in a very long time, completely free. "Thursday," she said. "Somewhere with good soba." He smiled, and she noticed it was a real smile, with the particular quality of a thing that is not performed. "I know exactly the place." Epilogue, March. The divorce was finalized in 8 months. Daniel received nothing from Ashford Next. It had been her sole proprietorship long before the marriage, and her attorney had spent the preceding 14 months quietly ensuring the entity structure reflected that precisely. He retained his car, his personal accounts, and the Charlotte clients he'd apparently been cultivating all along. The landscaping budget was, at last, his problem. She did not think of this as revenge. Revenge required that you still be oriented toward the person. She was not. She had turned to face something else entirely. She used a portion of the proceeds to fund 3 early-stage companies founded by women engineers. She kept a small stake in Ashford Next through an earn-out provision. She liked knowing the thing she'd built was still running well. She had dinner with Kenji on Thursday, and the Thursday after that, and somewhere over the Atlantic 6 months later, flying to Tokyo to meet his daughter and see the city he'd been describing to her in the careful, unhurried way of someone sharing something they love with someone they're beginning to trust. She looked out the window at the blue and endless dark and thought, this is what it was supposed to feel like. Not the arrival, not the $700 million, not the clean clothes or the signed papers or the finality of an ending. This, the feeling of being a person who had built something real, turned away from what had never deserved her, and was now, at last, moving towards something that did. Below the plane, the Pacific held its breath in silence. She was already thinking about what she wanted to build next.